Welcome, everybody, to the Boxing Prediction Show on the Grueling Truth Sports Network. As always, the Grueling Truth is brought to you by Betting.net. Betting.net's your best bet for finding the online sportsbook or online casino that's right for you. Make sure you check them out at Betting.net. I'm your host for the Boxing Prediction, Mike Goodpaster. Right now, I'd like to welcome in my co-host, author of ever written, Don Raspanti. How you doing, Don?
Thank you, Mr. Championship Coach. I'm doing pretty well. Thank you very much.
All right. And we've got two this week, which we're going to look at, which is Regis Prograis against Zepeda. We got Whyte versus Franklin. We'll preview those fights today and give you our best bet, which you can check out. Go to Betfred, which is our main sports book for this show. So make sure you check out Betfred and the link to the description of the video down below in YouTube. We will then have our old farts corner, which will be look back at Ray Boom Boom Mancini. That will follow our two fight previews, but we're going to start off with the Rougarou, Regis Prograis, as he takes on Jose Zepada in this is a big fight. It's a great matchup for fight fans to see. The only unfortunate thing is it's on something called Fight TV pay-per-view. But when you look at this battle, the thing that I question here between these two is Zepeda's ability to take a punch. I mean, we saw him against down guy, but not necessarily the greatest fighter in the world. So what's your take when you look at this fight?
Yeah, he did get knocked down numerous times against Branchek, who was a tough physical guy, but he got up every time, Mike, and he didn't seem buzzed. You know, that was the thing. Maybe his legs aren't that great anymore, but he got up and then he knocked Branchek out emphatically in the 5th round. So, yeah, I don't know. I can't remember if the Rougarou has ever even been down in his career. Maybe once. I don't even. And that's why that's a big maybe. He got hit with some pretty hellacious shots by Josh Taylor and survived, and then actually rallied and almost got Taylor late. That had been a 15-round fight. Who knows? But that's all gone now. But yeah, there is some question there, and it just appears maybe that Rougarou might be. Even though they're both 33, Mike, I think he's fresher as far as his body goes. But, this is people are saying 50-50 fight. I don't agree. I think Prograis is the favorite here. But
Zepada, actually, he's a large favorite. If you go to Betfred right now, Prograis to win straight up is -460. Zepada is +320. So this is more like a 3-1 or more fight. Both of these guys can punch. The Rougarou has a 79% finish rate. Zepada has knocked out 66% of his guys. Both boxers are 5'8". Zepada will enjoy a 3-inch reach advantage at 70 inches compared to Prograis 67. But stylistically, I think this is a great matchup.
Oh, it is, and it's at the Dignity Health Sports Arena, whatever, that used to be StubHub, and then the Home Depot Center before that, Mike. And I witnessed some really, really great fights there. I always have this theory that fighting outside brings out something. I don't know. And the crowd is always great and enthusiastic, and the fights, it's amazing, the great fights that have happened there. I'm not going to name them because there's so many. But I'm expecting this. I don't know about great because I don't want people to get too excited. But I expect this to maybe after a little bit of a slow start, these guys will really start going at it pretty much toe-to-toe is what I'm thinking.
Yeah, and I mean, when you look at these guys, I think they're very similar. And with Prograis, I think the footwork's a little bit better maybe. And when I look at this fight, we talk about the betting odds at -3 or +360, -420, whatever. I don't think this is a fight that Zepeda is going to win. I think Prograis is a better fighter. I think he punches a little bit harder. I think he's a slightly better finisher. I think in most categories here where you match these guys up, I think Prograis is just slightly better at almost everything.
Yeah, and defensively too. I think he's more responsible defensively. He doesn't get hit, and he was kind of mentioned that he doesn't get hit much. And the other thing too, Mike, because we never talk about this, is these are really two classy guys too. These aren't mouthy guys. These aren't throwing comments at each other that are totally ridiculous. When they get in the ring, they're like, "Oh, brother, give me a break." These are two real professionals that respect each other. And yeah, I give Prograis the edge, like you. I think he's likely going to win. Zepeda punches so hard that he's going to have that shot. 27 knockouts, 35 fights. He can punch, no doubt about that. So if he clips Prograis right, but it's a big if. I think Prograis. I don't know. Is that like 3.5 to 1? Definitely 2 to 1, maybe a little higher, 2.5 to 1, but. I wouldn't underestimate Zepeda too much, because this is another shot at the title that he's never won, and Prograis wants that title again. So there's going to be a lot going. These guys are really going to be motivated to win this fight.
Yeah. So what would be your best recommended bet here? I mean, would you throw the money on Zepeda at more than 3 to 1? Because the other things we get here is Zepeda to win by points or decision is plus 550. We've got Zepeda by KO or TKO plus 850. What I like here is Prograis by knockout or TKO at some point during the fight, because that's plus 110, which means if I bet $100, Prograis knocks him out, I get 110 back plus the 100 I already bet. To me, that's the way I'm betting this fight. I'm going to go Prograis at plus 110 by KO or TKO.
Yeah, and I said on the article on the Grueling Truth that I thought the fight Prograis would win inside the distance. I didn't pick a round or anything, but that's your best bet. Definitely. If you want to go with Zepeda, I don't think he wins a decision here. I think he's going to have to stop Prograis, and of course that's a long shot too. But if you want to give it, since the odds are a little longer, take a shot. It might not be the worst bet in the world, but Prograis definitely the favorite here to win inside the distance by stoppage.
Yeah, because if you do think Zepeda's going to win and you think he has to knock him out to win, you get plus 850, which is almost 9 to 1 odds. $100 bet be 850 plus your 100 back. I think you got to go out and throw $1,000 on that, John.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And right. And you're the betting master, Mike. So, but yeah, I definitely.
Well, I'm telling you, take Prograis by the stoppage plus 110. I think that is the safest bet here.
Yeah, it is. It's the safest bet for sure. And it looks that way. Prograis rarely takes a step back. And if he does, then he's losing. Like Josh Taylor got him to back up. I don't think he's going to be taking a step back. I think he's going to be right there, moving forward, pounding on Zepeda. Will be firing back. And what you said initially is probably the biggest key, is that who can take it better, who's got the resistance. And I think it's Prograis.
All right, guys, remember, it's not just sports betting. Betting.net compares the best online casinos. Sit back, relax, play the top online slots, poker, and table games. Also, go check out TGT Play on YouTube and on Twitter if you're into social casinos. That will give you the rundown, the best place to go play the slots, table games with social casinos. Make sure you check out TGT Play. Right, us to the heavyweights this weekend, which who doesn't want to watch another night fight? He will take on Jermaine Franklin. Now, this fight, where the odds are pretty long. The reason is Franklin really has no quality competition he has beaten or even fought. Dillian Whyte, though, is coming off basically a brutal 6-round one-punch knockout from Tyson Fury, and he's a little older, gets up there in age. That's Sylvester Stallone calling me again, guys. I'm sorry, but I always use the Bill Conti Rocky theme when Sylvester calls, but I'm just going to tell him he's going to have to wait. But when you watch this fight, or when you look at this fight, when you match these guys up, this is a mismatch. You know, Jermaine Franklin has done nothing to make you think he's going to beat Dillian Whyte. But then again, Dillian Whyte's never really done anything to make me think he's really that good. I think he is one of the more overrated heavyweights in boxing today. But Jermaine Franklin's fought once in 3 years. This is obviously a get-right fight for Whyte after he got knocked out. But Whyte is up there, early to mid-30s, just comes off a devastating knockout. What do you think here? Does Franklin have a chance?
Yeah, he's got a chance, and we all know that Whyte's kryptonite is the uppercut, and he's going to be trying to throw it. He's got a chance. He doesn't seem like the big puncher that would make me think he's got a better chance. I know he's got 14 stoppages, and 21 fights, but that doesn't mean anything because he really, as you said, hasn't really fought anybody. So, yeah, he's got a shot, but yeah, this is a setup fight in a sense, not meaning it's fixed, but it's a setup fight for.
You never know, though, John.
You never know. I know it's boxing, but with Whyte, because Eddie Hearn knows that a Joshua fight and Whyte rematch would sell out quickly out there, and that would be the end of Dillian Whyte and all his stuff. But he wants a rematch against everybody. The funny thing is, real fast, Mike, is that knockout against Tyson Fury in his last fight. Speaking of Whyte, I saw an article that just emphatically said that he wasn't knocked out; he was pushed down, and that was why I lost. And I thought, I think this guy must be in Dillian Whyte's corner or his pocket, because I thought, come on, he got hit with a punch and then he got shoved. That's true, but he was out pretty much to a degree after the punch, not when he landed on the ground. But yeah, he's always been a guy that I've really never been that impressed with. He's okay, I'll say that, but I've never thought, people are like, oh, he's such a really good fighter. It's like, really? Okay, I don't see it.
Yeah, nobody sees it. When we look at the odds for this fight, Dillian Whyte is minus 1,400. So do not bet that under any circumstances. Jermaine Franklin is plus 640. Might be worth the flyer. But the thing that interests me here is this. Do you think Jermaine Franklin can go to distance here?
I don't know enough about him to really know that emphatically, but I think there's a good chance that he could go to the distance. Yeah, I mean, I don't think.
Here's the interesting thing.
Okay,
if you bet Dillian Whyte to win by decision, the odds are plus 420. So if you bet $100 on Dillian Whyte to go to distance and win the fight, pays you $420 plus you get the 100 back. So you throw 100 on it, you walk home with $520. I really don't see any other way to bet this fight that makes sense unless you think Jermaine Franklin is going to win, which I don't think makes sense. I can see it happening just because White's getting up there in age. He's coming off a brutal knockout, but I've never seen enough from Franklin to make me think it would be worth risking even a small bet. So I think just for the hell of it, if I was going to bet this fight, I would throw like $50 on Dillian Whyte by decision and take the plus 420.
Yeah, because there's always question about Dillian Whyte's conditioning too. He gets tired later in fights. So if Franklin can hang on through 8 or 9 rounds, he could go the distance. He could. And you would think if you're Franklin, he's been working with Tyson Fury. Everybody knows that. This is his shot. So if you're him, and if you've got any pride or anything, determination, I don't know what the word is, determination, he's going to be in the best shape he can be, because if he happens to win, he gets Joshua and he gets the biggest payday of his life. So you would think he would want to give himself the best chance possible, and being in great shape would help. So yeah, there's a chance that could happen. A decision is the best bet. I agree.
All right. So our top picks for the Grueling Truth for me and John are to take Regis Prograis by knockout, I think it was, at plus 110. Take Dillian Whyte by decision at plus 420. And if you want to do that, remember, betting.net finds the best promotions, offers, and bonus codes so you don't have to. Head over to the website now to take advantage of things like free bets and matching deposits. Check them out at betting.net. Remember to check out TGT Play. Like, subscribe to us on YouTube. Give us a little thumbs up so you get notified on any of our shows. I want to bring up the fact that tonight at 8 o'clock Eastern Time, we'll have the NFL prediction show with myself, NFL beat writer Dan Kornhauser, and Steve Risley. All right, we get to our favorite part, which is something I want to talk about. I don't want to talk about Whyte and Franklin. I just don't.
I can tell.
I mean, they're crap. I mean, I don't care. Dillian Whyte, the fact that he's a top 5 heavyweight by a lot of people, that'll tell you where the heavyweight division is. It'll tell you where boxing is. But we're going to go ahead. We're going to look back to the early to mid-90s. We're going to take a look at Ray Boom Boom Mancini. Now, Boom Boom has to be one of John's favorite because he's a paisan like John is.
That's right.
And when we look back at Ray Mancini, I think a lot of people look at it the way they looked at Arturo Gatti, maybe, where he's a fighting fighter. But he was more of a media creation. And if you lived back then, he was kind of a media creation, because you had the story of his dad, Lenny, who because of World War II was the #1 contender, never got a title shot. You had the stories about him sitting up the attic looking at his dad's old newspaper clippings, boxing magazines. But when you watch Ray Mancini, I mean, he was a little different than guys like Alex Ramos, who was the big white heavyweight back in the day, the Tomorrow's Champions, all those guys, where they never really fought anybody that was that good. If you look at Ray Mancini, Yeah, if you look at Ray Mancini, you got guys like Johnny Summerhays was a solid fighter. He fought him early in his career. Norman Goins, who he knocked out, Madison Square Garden. But then you get up to 1981. I mean, 1981 in July, he fought Jose Luis Ramirez, and he basically shut him out in a great performance in Warren, Ohio. That was a made-for-TV show, but Ramirez was a very good fighter, was a former world champion, would win a world championship after this even. And I think when I saw that fight with Ramirez and Mancini was the first time I realized that, Ray Mancini is a legitimately talented fighter.
Yeah, exactly. And I saw an earlier fight of his, and he won. You didn't see very much of it, and he could punch. You could see that right away. And then the whole thing about his dad, and there was an article in Ring Magazine about it, and Lenny was really, really a good fighter. And I remember that Ramirez fight was on Sports Spectacular, I believe. I think it was Tim Ryan
CBS.
and Gil Clancy. Yeah, and might have been those two guys who I loved, Tim Ryan and Gil Clancy. And I think probably because I was a little surprised too, because I didn't quite know how good Ray was. I thought he obviously was pretty good, but they seemed surprised too, because Ramirez came in with a record, I believe, at like 71-3 or something like that. And Boom Boom was not expected to dominate like he did. And he was relentless like he always was. And he had a really good left hook. He could punch always. You're not called Boom Boom for nothing. I mean, he could punch legitimately. And he just stalked and rocked and rolled and did a number on Ramirez for 12 rounds. And it wasn't a big wow kind of thing, but it was what do you know about that? This guy is legit. So that was really fun, and I think that in a sense won over more boxing fans, the more hardcore, because he showed that he was a media creation in some ways, but a media creation who could fight, and he showed it.
And the impressive thing was 2 months later, he gets a title shot once again on CBS Sports Spectacular, I believe. Arguello fights Mancini. Mancini's ranked third. This is a fight people don't realize if you watch the fight again. After 10 rounds, one judge had Arguello ahead, one had Mancini ahead. The third had to fight even, but that's when the experience of Arguello kicked in. And for my money, at 130, Arguello maybe was the greatest fighter I ever saw. He was a big puncher. Technically, he was sound. Mancini had won his first 20 fights, but I think it was the 11 for 12 round where Arguello actually drops Mancini and then drops him again in the 14th. But, Alexis Arguello, after that fight, said someday this young man will be champion. And I think the fight was in Atlantic City, and it was one of the best fights of 1981.
It was, and I can remember, obviously, I loved Arguello because, again, he was class. He was such a good fighter. God, he was a great fighter. What am I talking about? He was a great fighter pulling for Boom Boom because I liked Boom Boom, not just because he was a fight. Well,
it helped. It was just because of that, John. Come on. There's no reason to ever cheer against Alexis Arguello.
Right, and it was, and Mancini was like, he was guts. My favorite other fighter was Armando Muniz, and these guys, they led with their chin a lot of times, and they were just their guts was more than their determination, or their guts and their determination was more than their ability. And the way he hung on, I remember thinking after 10 rounds, oh my God, is he actually going to beat Arguello? But then you could see that he was starting to fade a little bit, and he got stopped. I see Rob Day, our friend, a similar career to Barry McGuigan. Interesting comparison. I liked McGuigan a lot too. Mike, he was a hell of a fighter until he got beat, and he retired young, like Boom Boom, I believe, and then Boom Boom came back, unfortunately, like 4 years later to fight Camacho in a big money fight, and then Greg
Haugen a few years after that.
Yeah, that was
I think
too bad.
It's a good comparison because I think this. Yeah. I don't think Barry McGuigan gets the credit. I mean, Barry McGuigan.
No, right.
Beat Eusebio Pedrosa, who had defended his title up at that point, 15 or 20 times. And, he got him at home. Barry McGuigan beat Pedrosa. I thought he clearly beat him. When you compare the fighters, I think maybe McGuigan was technically a little bit better than Mancini. But the thing about both of them is they were both tough. They were both willing to do whatever it took to win. And, I mean, people forget, McGuigan beat, who am I thinking of? Juan Laporte also. And I remember the first time I saw McGuigan was when he fought Felipe Orozco. I think it was on NBC. But when you go back to Ray Mancini, that sets up, of course, his boxing. So there's more than one champion. And he gets a shot at Arturo Frias, who I believe, didn't he win the title from Claude Noel, which I think
Sounds right.
surprised people. But Frias and Mancini, for the minute and a half that fight went, was an absolute war.
Yeah, I obviously watching it again, and I remember Boom Boom got wobbled by Frias, and I went, "Oh no!" But he did what he always did, which is punch back. I mean, he was like live or die when he was in there. I'm either going to make it or I'm going to get beat by somebody, and he was tough, obviously as hell, like we said about McGuigan. And yeah, he was wobbly, and I think he bounced off against the ropes, but then he recovered really quickly and he started pounding on Frias, and then he got Frias. He knocked him down, and it was about a very exciting 2 minutes plus of. And then, of course, when he won, I loved it. And his parents, I mean, they were at ringside, Lenny and his mom and Boom Boom's mom, and it was a made for TV moment. But again, I thought,
well, actually, they made a movie about it in 1984 too.
Right, produced by the guy who just called you. He probably wanted to talk about it, Sylvester Stallone. So it makes sense that
tight, but.
I've heard.
Yeah, he's still mad at me because I wouldn't be in Rhinestone with him. I said, Sly, it's a bad idea to make that movie, and he just wouldn't listen to me.
He didn't want you in there because you could sing better than him. So he didn't want you to embarrass him like that.
I do sing like a bird, but
yeah, I've heard rumors, but I'm not going to go there. But the coach. Okay. But that movie wasn't a bad movie, by the way, if anybody's ever seen it. And Doug, somebody played Boom Boom. I can't remember his name. I can't remember his last name. I don't want to butcher it, but he played Boom Boom. But back to Boom Boom. Then we have to talk about the Bramble fights and yeah.
We can't go straight to the Bramble fight. I mean, there's a couple other fights there first.
Especially one that beat Bobby Chacon and Reno. Yeah.
Not just that. And what was the dude? Now you got me trying to think of what the name was. Was it Doug McKeon?
Yeah, Doug McKeon. Doug somebody. McKeon.
Yeah, I think it was Doug McKeon.
Oh yeah,
and then I think
Kim too.
I think Tony Burton was in that movie too. But I want to talk about Ernesto Arspania because Ernesto
was a really good fight.
Was the guy who I believe almost had more title shots than he had fights. Because it seemed like Ernesto Arspania, was owned by the WBC. Real quick, Rob Day says both had to deal with the deaths of an opponent.
We haven't talked about that yet.
American Beater. Yeah. And I mean, that's completely true. And I do think they were both highly underrated fighters. But he gets a shot against he fights Ernesto Espana. He got beat up by Homer Kente twice right before that. But when you look at the Espana fight, that stuck out to me was, number one, it was only 2 months after he won the title. And on top of that, it was done in Warren, Ohio, I believe, Youngstown, Ohio, at his old high school, and the place was absolutely packed. The TV ratings were phenomenal for it. And I think this is the point where Mancini gets close, being damn near a superhero, which gets shortly after this. But then you get the Dooku Kim fight in November in the heat in Vegas. I remember this fight, and I remember thinking, how's Dooku Kim ranked number one? He hadn't really beat anybody. Mancini is going to walk right through this guy. And really, at a tragic ending with Dooku Kim dying, without that tragic ending, it wouldn't have been the fight of the year because of Arguello Pryor, which happened a couple weeks later. But I mean, Kim and Mancini is probably the fight of 1982, if not for Arguello Pryor. And Arguello Pryor was one of the 4 or 5 greatest fights I ever saw. So I think a lot of the credit goes away from Mancini because Kim passed away, and that's what people remember. But Ray Mancini had to be willing to give up everything to beat a guy like Dooku Kim. And he prevailed in the fight. And really, if you watch that fight, it's not just a Pier 6 brawl. They both were mechanically pretty good that day.
Yeah, that was 14 rounds of just brutal, intense hell. And it was hot. And yeah, Boom Boom, because of the tragic ending, which obviously was really tragic. He was a very young man, Dooku Kim, when he died. He took so many punches in that fight and never seemed to weaken, and neither did Dooku Kim, basically, until the end. And it was one of those fights that you're, through 10 rounds, you're like, oh my God. And then around the 12th round, I'm thinking, well, who's going to collapse first? And I thought, like you, Mike, I thought this was going to be an easier one for Boom Boom. I thought he was going to win like inside 5. I remember thinking that. And by the 8th or 9th round, I was like, oh my God, but Boom Boom might lose. I mean, this guy's hanging tough. But Boom Boom was his usual self, relentless. And Dooku was trying to box a little bit more, but he was also willing to just stand in the middle of the ring and just slug with Boom Boom. And it also seemed to me that Mancini was surprised that the guy could take it and keep coming back. So it was one of those, it was like a movie fight in a sense that I'll hit you 3 or 4 times, you hit me 2 or 3 times, back and forth. But
and it's a fight that's great, but because of the ending, it's almost impossible for me to watch, because I mean, it was just like the other one that strikes me like that would have been Johnny Owen against Luke.
Oh.
I have a hard time watching it because I know how it ends.
Yeah, exactly. I haven't seen it since. I haven't seen the fight since I watched it live.
I watched it once and then I turned it off at the end.
Yeah, because we know that we know the dangers of boxing. We know that we obviously know that anybody who follows boxing, loves boxing, knows. And I don't remember thinking during the fight and later on in the fight that obviously something was going to happen. But when guys are absorbing those kind of blows, that's the possibility. So.
Yeah, and then after that, for some reason, they take him to Italy. And he's fighting George Feeney 3 months after this. But I think this gives you an idea that Mancini is going to have a hell of a time overcoming this, because George Feeney was just a guy. And the final scores on those fights were 98-96, 98-95, and 98-96. He then fought Orlando Romero. And I think that was at Madison Square Garden in September of '83.
Remember that.
And he ended up beating Romero, but that was a close fight. I believe he was up by 1 point on 2 of the judges' scorecards. It was tie. It was even on the other. And nobody really knew who Romero was, even though he was undefeated. Then you get the win over Johnny Torres, which I think, wasn't it the undercard of like Holmes and Mervis Frazier? I think it was, because I think they were like back-to-back one-round knockouts. Then he fights Bobby Chacon, who's one of both of our favorites. Bobby Chacon just wasn't big enough, but that fight to me was very similar to Hagler Hearns.
Yeah, but Bobby couldn't hurt. I mean, Hearns hit Hagler with a hellacious shot in the first round, cut him, and and all that. And it's a boxing fan I hear in the background wanting to get his opinion in right here. But he just overpowered him. Yeah, he just overpowered him.
I don't even think that's my dog, John. I think it's a dog outside of our window barking. It's a wonder I don't have 3 other dogs barking back at him right now.
Yeah, they obviously don't respect him. So that's just the way they're just trying to ignore him.
Yeah.
But the thing was too about Boom Boom and Chacon was you knew that was going to be that kind of fight with Bobby Chacon, because that was the way he fought. And it was, if you like Bobby Chacon, again, it was that was a hard one to watch in the sense that Bobby Chacon just took so many punches.
Yeah. And that was a fight where I love Mancini and I love Chacon. I basically just watched it. I kind of knew what was going to happen just because Mancini was younger, he was bigger, he was stronger. But Bobby Chacon was a badass. Both these guys were. After Chacon fight, he fights Livingstone Bramble. This is a guy that I don't even know her fight. And I think it was like June or July of 1984. And I mean, Bramble won the fight. The thing that's amazing is when you look at the judges, it was actually scored as a split decision up until the stoppage, which I love Mancini, but that fight was not that close. Mancini went to the hospital after the fight, got 8 stitches in one eyelid, 6 in the other. And he was actually losing. But a judge by the name of Stanley Berg, if I remember right, actually had Mancini winning by 5 points. The other 2 judges, I think it was Lou Moret, had Bramble by 1. And I don't remember the other judge's name, but he had Bramble by 3 points. But this was a shock. And this was also the interesting thing about this I remember is it wasn't shown live where I lived, because I live in Indiana. It was shown on tape delay the next day on one of those UHF channels. And I watched it and didn't know who won the fights. But this was also, it ended up being called like the night of upsets, because it's the same boxing card where the fight before this, Gene Mad Dog Hatcher shocked everybody by knocking out Johnny Bumpus with one punch, I think, in like the 11th round.
Yeah, Johnny Bump City Bumpus. Yeah, that was a big one. And Hatcher didn't have nearly the boxing ability, but he could punch pretty hard. Yeah, I'm thinking about all these fights that Boom Boom had after the Dooku Kim. See, that tells you how different a time it was, Mike. Now we wouldn't even have seen him for over a year. Probably they would have let him rest emotionally.
Actually, you know what? He probably should have. I mean, that's one time where a guy probably should have taken a year off.
Yeah, I know, and that's just how it was in those days. If you look at Boom Boom's record, you see he fought like every 2 or 3 months, and he should have been that fight, considering all the punishment he took against Dooku Kim, and then of course mentally the guy dies. I mean, he was devastated. He talked about retiring and all that, and like you would think you would, because you never want to kill somebody. So yeah, I think so too. So I wonder how his body was going into the Bramble fight. That Romero fight, I remember that one. I remember watching it going, gosh, is he going to lose to this guy? Because he just didn't seem to have the fire. And he was kind of just going through the motions, like sometimes happens. Maybe he had an off night or whatever it was. But I was wondering about the Dooku Kim fight. Had it affected him where he was hesitant, to do what he did?
See, I don't know how something like the Dooku Kim fight, or if you're Lupe Pintor to Johnny Owen fight, I don't know how that doesn't affect you.
Yeah.
At least a little bit. And we got a rematch in Reno. And the thing I remember about Bramble is, you remember all the crap he talked. He had the witch doctors and everything in the first fight. I absolutely hated Livingstone Bramble.
Me too.
And I know you've heard this story before, but then I interviewed him a few years ago, and he's like the coolest guy I've ever talked to.
Yes.
And off air, he's like, dude, I was just trying to make a name. I was trying to get in his head. And he said to this day, he sees Mancini and still tries to apologize. And Mancini still won't have anything to do with him. But Livingstone Bramble won the rematch by a point on all 3 cards. I'm a huge Mancini fan. When I originally watched it, I thought he won by a point, which means he probably didn't, because I was very biased at this point because I couldn't stand Bramble. But Mancini loses this fight. And it was, if they would have, they could have fought this one. I mean, it was a great fight, John.
Yeah, I like you. I was hoping that Boom Boom might win. It looked like he might have, or at least, or a draw, or something. And Rob's right. That loss was a shocker. I didn't expect that. I'd heard a little bit about Bramble, but I didn't expect him to do what he did. And yeah, by the second fight, I just despised the guy. And like you, I actually ended up calling Bramble on the phone for it to appear on the Ringside Boxing Show, and he was such a nice guy. And I thought, but then again, I can even understand Boom Boom Mancini being like, buddy, I know it was a long time ago, but get away. I mean, I don't think I'd be hold a grudge that many years, but I don't know. I mean, those were hard. Those fights were hard. And the second one, Boom Boom probably thinks he won. So he has a hard time with that. But, competitive people, that sometimes happens. But yeah, that second fight, it was really close, but I watched it again and I thought the decision was right. Unfortunately.
Yeah. So did I, right, in 1985, but it was still a great fight. It was one of those fights, even though your guy lost, you got your money's worth. I think that was on HBO. Then he retired for years. He comes back to fight Hector Macho Camacho. Complete Mancini, and I mean, was a huge disappointment for me. I know the fight was scored close. I think it was 113 twice for Camacho, 116, 112 for Mancini. I also think this is the Camacho that after the 1986, the date with Edwin Rosario where he got skimmed pretty good, that I don't think Camacho was ever completely the same. This was for a made-up title, the WBO Junior Welterweight title, which was a vacant inaugural title. Camacho was a 3-1 favorite. The fight was a sellout in Nevada. It was shown on closed circuit. This was a boring fight. I mean, when it was over, each man went to his corner thinking he won, where really neither one of them probably did enough to win. Mancini was the aggressor, but this fight was a disappointment, I think.
Yeah, and I didn't really think he was going to win that fight. I remember thinking, okay, look, I don't blame you, bro. I mean, you want to get some more money. He retired when he was like 24 years old the first time, and he's so young still. So I mean, I get that. It was because of the punishment, and I think because of the Dooku Kim fight that he said, "Look, I'm done." But and those fights with Livingston Bramble was so rough, so physical, so taxing on him. But I watched it. It was a dull fight, and Camacho won. Boom Boom was relentless, but as usual. But he was a little slower, and his punches weren't as sharp. And if that had been the Boom Boom that fought Jose Luis Ramirez, he'd have won. But he wasn't that guy anymore, and Camacho wasn't the same guy either. You're right. I mean, he was never the same guy after what Rosero did to him. So he did his thing, and it was the hype was a hell of a lot more than the fight. And so it was a disappointment, especially if you paid to watch it, which I didn't.
Yeah, that's why it would have been more happened today. But and then you get, of course, as all boxers do, the one last hurrah against Greg Haugen, which ended absolutely horribly as Mancini a guy that I don't think would have ever beaten Ray Mancini when Mancini was at his best. And I have a ton of respect for Haugen. He was a good fighter. Mancini better in his prime. This was not their prime. Yeah, as Rob says, 4 years more fight difficult for Ray. Another 3 fight impossible against a guy who was a solid workman-like champion in Greg Haugen. But I think the takeaway here to me is this: Ray Mancini, in much the way Barry McGuigan is a very underrated fighter. I don't think either one of them get the credit they deserve. They both, I mean, he fought Alexis Arguello, who was an absolute legend, one of my favorite fighters of all time, one of the greatest fighters of all time, especially at that weight. He fought him tooth and nail, and he put up a better fight than a lot of guys did when they fought Arguello. And I just think that it's a shame that Mancini has fought about the way he was, which is basically just a face first slugger. Face first sluggers don't completely outbox Jose Luis Ramirez.
Exactly, and that if you're going to watch Boom Boom in any of his fights, that one I don't think is nearly as famous in a sense as obviously the Bramble fights or sadly the Dooku Kim fight or especially the Alexis Arguello fight. If you're really going to watch him when he really seemed like he was on point, and it not seemed he was, and I still think that was his best performance of his career because I mean he was doing everything right, and that showed boxing ability too. He was slipping punches. He was just fighting really well. He's just a young guy there too, obviously, and he was just really he was doing it. And like I said, I think I remember the announcers actually being very surprised. I think they thought Ramirez was going to beat him, and I remember thinking, "Oh man, this is a big jump up." But if you want to see what you and me and probably a lot of people thought is his best performance, I mean, you could argue that his best.
I think it might be the Arguello fight
against. I was just gonna say against Arguello. He was still that same guy that fought Ramirez, and that proves to you right there that Boom Boom Mancini definitely had talent and could fight.
All right, John, we're going to wrap it up, but we have some big fights coming up next weekend too. So next week we will wrap up these fights and then look forward to next weekend's fights. Who is on the docket for next weekend? I think Chocolatito is, isn't he?
Chocolatito and Estrada for the 3rd time around. And then, of course, the fight I know you're excited about because you won't show anybody the poster that's off camera, but you've got Fury and Chisora fighting for the 3rd time. I know you're thrilled. And there's something that's not popping in my, but those are the main ones. And Gonzalez and Estrada, the last fight, I thought Chocolatito won. I'm surprised he didn't get the decision. Oh, that's going to be tough to do.
Yeah, but anytime those guys fight, it's going to be a disputed decision, and half the people are going to think one of them won, and the other half are going to think the other one.
Yeah, and they're that close, and we'll see. They've been off for a while, and that's always when you're getting older. They're both getting a little older, a lot of wear and tear, especially on Chocolatito. I can't even believe, in a sense, that Chocolatito has come back all the way like he did after seeing him get knocked out by Rungsei a few years ago. I thought he was done. And the fact that he's come all the way back, Mike, is just a testament to the guy's will and skill and everything else and above. And Alexis Arguello was his mentor. So he's just a great fighter.
All right, guys, remember to check out TGT Play if you like social casinos. Also, go follow us at Grueling Truth. I want to thank Rob for listening in with everybody else today. We'll be back next weekend. Make sure you go to YouTube, like, subscribe. Also, click on our link for Betfred, which is our top-rated sports book for betting on the fights this weekend. Remember, if you're going to bet it, bet Prograis by knockout is plus 110. And make sure you go check out Amazon. Type in John Raspanti in the authors section, and you'll get his 3 books, which were
Intimate Warfare, the first one, the baby that started this whole whatever this is, and then of course my personal baby, really my own baby, Blood on My Notebook, my journey through boxing, and then a nice little personal book with Jerry Fitch, a few more rounds that we sure love writing, and they're different, especially the Gotti and Ward, and then Blood on My Notebook, like I said, my own journey, and then Jerry's 10 years older than me, and we just reminisce about some of the people and the greatest things we saw in our boxing writing careers. And they're fun books, I hope, for people to read.
Well, Rob Day chimed in with great books. So if anybody would know, it's Rob, because we know he's as big a boxing fan as anybody. He's a great historian for boxing. We will always disagree about super middleweight, because I still think I love Joe Calzaghe.
Me too.
I think Roy Jones and Andre Ward in their prime would have nicked him. But it
would
have been close. And I love Joe Calzaghe.
Sure.
But the super middleweights, the list gets kind of weak after number 4. But those top 4, that list can hang with just about any division. Make sure you check that out on thegruelingtruth.com today, which is my own personal top 10. I still can't believe I still put Sven Otke at 10, because I think every fight I saw him fight, I thought he lost. But we're going to go ahead. We're going to wrap the show up. Make sure you check out the NFL prediction show tonight at 8. Everybody have a great Thanksgiving. But for now, for John Raspanti, I'm Mike Goodpaster. You've been watching and listening to The Grueling Truth, where the legends speak. Oh. He's the one.